And then the other thing I guess I struggle the most is public transportation. So like really in Columbia, Missouri, if you don't have a car, you can't go anywhere. So even though I'm not religious, but I definitely think that churches in Columbia, they're doing a lot of good. The other thing that I found it most interesting about Chinese restaurant in the US is fortune cookie. So after you had a meal, they give you a fortune cookie. I'm like, what is this? They say, what? You don't know about this? You're Chinese. I'm like, yeah, no one do that in China. Like, what? After a meal, you get a fortune cookie? No.
Where did that come from then?
Don't know. I didn't look it up actually, so I don't.
Back to Big Picture Podcast, where we discuss faith testimonies and perspectives. While focusing on the big picture, I'm your host, Susan Obi. Happy Wednesday. Welcome back to the podcast. For today's episode, I am kind of continuing on with this series that we were in a couple weeks ago, creating space for differences, culture, faith, and religion. So it's a very similar episode to that and similar conversation. I spoke with Varsha and I spoke with Vivian in those last two episodes, and both of them were in my program at the University of Missouri, and they finished their doctorate in medical pharmacology and physiology. So I just thought, let me just ask other friends that I had in my program and just kind of get their take and kind of catch up with them and see where they're at now. So Liping is one of my other friends that was part of that program in Missouri, and she finished her doctorate last year. So I have Liping on, and I'm so glad to just catch up with her. It's been a couple years or a few years since we've got to hang out and see each other. So I texted her and asked if she'd be interested in joining, and she agreed. So Liping, thank you for coming on today.
Hi, Susan. Thank you for having me. Hi, everyone. I'm Liping.
Yeah, it's so good to see you and just to catch up and just kind of hear where you're at. So I will just let you kind of take over. So can you share a little bit about who you are, what you're doing now since you finished your PhD, and where you're from?
Sure. So again, my name is Liping, and I'm from China. I was born in a small coastal city called Shanghai in China, kind of the southern part of China, very close to Hong Kong, if you're more familiar with that city, like an hour away. And I did my bachelor and master in China. Then I came to Missouri to do my graduate study. As Susan mentioned, I graduated last year, and now I live in Boston, and I'm a postdoctoral researcher at Brigham and Women's Hospital and Harvard Medical School.
Very impressive. So Liping is super smart. Everyone in my program is. Everyone in my program is. So Liping is at Harvard, and she's doing her postdoctoral research. So can you share a little bit about what does that mean that you're a postdoctorate researcher, and then just give an overview of what you do day to day and what you're kind of researching?
Sure. So postdoctoral is kind of like a training phase before you step into the next phase, like which would be like a assistant professor. So my goal is to stay in the academic track. So if, like, for example, like Vivian, she doesn't want it to eventually become a professor, so she doesn't really need a postdoc experience. But if you do want it to stay in academia and then eventually become a professor, postdoctoral training is like a must-have. I know people are like still arguing about it, like, is it necessary? There's a lot of argument about postdoctoral training, but right now people still need to do it, and it depends on what kind of major you're in. Like some of my friends, they are in like agricultural or engineering or like more like education, psychology. They only need to do like 1 to 2 years of postdoctoral training. But like for medical and like for us, like pharmacology, physiology, pathology, neuroscience, like for all of this, mostly like 5 years. That is kind of like the average. Some people might like finish it a little earlier, but some people might go to like 7 years. So it's like a training phase for you to develop like independent writing skill, like research ideas. Like you need to be more independent as compared to like graduate student. So you don't have any classes. Basically, it's a job. So you got paid, but you are paid, below average compared to other job. Like if I went to industry, I definitely can make more money because they still consider us as trainee. So you're not like well paid, but you are receiving some training like from your supervisor, or like the university would have like a lot of workshop, like specifically for postdoc. So right now, actually, I'm in postdoctoral association at Brigham. I'm the chair of a group for diversity, equity, and inclusion. And then we also hosted like a lot of events like, grant writing workshop, like how to develop your career, like those kind of things. Those are all considered like training during postdoc, and also for you to like build some relationship before you, become like really just by yourself to start your own lab. So day to day, I would say besides the going to class, like mostly I think it's very similar to when I was in my graduate school. Like I go to lab and then I read papers and I do experiment. I discuss idea with my PI and my lab mates, kind of like that. Yeah.
That sounds really cool. And you are now in neuroscience, which is a little bit of a switch from pharmacology and physiology, the field that we were both in school. So can you share a little bit about why you made that switch, and then give any detail that you can about what you're researching? I know we kind of talked about keeping it on the down low. So as much as you can, though.
Sure. For my graduate study, I was in cardiovascular research. And I'm not like really in the heart. Like I know Vivian are like really looking on the heart. I'm more like the vessel part. I do like the artery vascular research. So the majority of my time was on investigating the role of like high fat diet, like specifically Western diet that's high in fat, high in sugar, high in salt. What's that gonna do to your vessel? And specifically, I focus on vascular stiffness. So it's like how stiff your vessel is, because when your vessel gets stiff, they're not flexible, and that can cause a lot of issue and eventually increase the workload for your heart, and you can develop into many heart disease. So we do arterial stiffness, kind of like a window that you can, if you can prevent arterial stiffness, then you can prevent a lot of heart disease. So that's for my graduate study. And I really enjoyed it. It's really fun. And then I published papers on this, so that's great. And then, so when I finished my PhD, I started to think more into, okay, since I wanted to stay in academia, what kind of research I wanted to do when I have my own lab. I really need to sit down and think about it, because, graduate study, you kind of pick your PI and then the major, but majority like is still led by your PI, like what is his major interest, and then maybe like some signaling molecule, I can kind of, I think this pathway I'm more interested in, I'm going to study this, or like I feel like this experiment are more solid, I'm going to do this experiment. At that extent, you have some like independence, but not like overall, like the big picture kind of, in graduate, as a graduate student, you probably don't have that. I know some labs still have that, but so I was thinking, okay, so when I have my individual lab, what I wanted to study, I think the heart is still interested, but is that the absolutely one topic that I wanted to do? And as I think more into it, I feel like I wanted to study the overall. Everything is connected as a human, it's like systemic, but we're always like so focused on like a specific detail. Like, okay, let's look at the heart. Okay, let's look at our hands, our feet, our brain. I feel like everything is interacting with each other. So if you only take out this specific part to study it, you never know, when you have a mechanism, when you eventually develop a drug, when the people, consume that kind of drug, you don't know what's that going to do to other organs. So I was thinking, well, I wanted to do how they communicate with each other. Like, how does the heart talk to the brain, and how does the brain talk to the heart, and which one is the dominant one, right? That's kind of like a really fun topic. Also, like, does your brain die first or does your heart die first? That's also like a topic I found very interesting. So I wanted to study the it's called inter-organ communication pathway. And then like how cell to talk to cell, like a cell from your heart, how do they communicate with a cell in your brain? So, okay, if I wanted to do this, then I need to gain some more knowledge about the other organs. So, and I'm really interested in neuroscience. I feel like the brain is just so interesting, fascinating to me. So when I was looking for postdoctoral position, I specifically focused on lab that do neuroscience because I wanted to gain some experience, like, okay, what kind of disease that are, out there, and then the mechanisms. I wanted to study the brain. And then when I become independent, I wanted to connect them together and then study how they actually communicate to each other. Or when people age, which organ age first, and like how does that, how does the aging of heart affecting the aging of brain, like things like that. Yeah. So that's why I switched to neuroscience.
Yeah, that's really interesting. And it's kind of like a big picture perspective of just taking steps back and looking at the human body as a whole and how it's all interrelated. Because if you think about the function of the heart, I like what you said, that it's very easy to focus on the heart itself. But what is the function of the heart? It's supplying the blood and nutrients to the rest of the organs. So it's like the heart is really interesting, but what it's doing is essentially why we're able to live. So sending blood up to the brain and things like that. So yeah, that's really awesome. So the next thing that I wanted to talk to you about is, what was your experience like schooling in China? And then how was it an adjustment moving to the US? Because I was telling Varsha this, with both you and Varsha, I never felt like, oh, this person is so new to the US and they don't know what's going on. Like, it just felt very easy to just be friends with y'all. Not that it wouldn't have been easy if y'all were unfamiliar with the culture, but it didn't seem like that big of a transition for you. So can you kind of speak to, maybe it was, can you kind of speak to that?
Yeah. So actually, I think I had quite a unique experience for schooling in China. It's a long story, if you don't mind.
Go ahead.
But it might inspire some people, I think. So I would like to share that story. So first of all, I'm a first gen. So no one went to college before me in my family. And in fact, my mom was born in a very poor family. So she didn't even have a chance to go to school at all. But both of my parents are very supportive in terms of me wanting to pursue higher education. So I did my undergrad at Guangdong Pharmaceutical University in Guangzhou. And then at that time, most people that major in pharmacy, as I did, tended to ultimately work as pharmacists within a hospital, or as pharmaceutical sales representative within like a pharmaceutical company. And at that time, that's how many years ago? 8-9 years ago. And I thought I would be a very good, sales representative because I really like interacting with people. So then I focused most of my energy on developing marketing skill, communicating with people. And to be honest, I was not doing as well in my course studies as I should have. So I wasn't really like good student at that time. But things has changed on the last year of my bachelor. So that's kind of like a fun story, I think. So that was summer break. And then I went back to my hometown, stay with my parents because I was learning how to drive, because they thought that, well, within another year, I'll need to, go to work. It's better to know how to drive. And then I went to a driving school, and there's many like people, like we need to take turn to go with the coach. So there's a lot of like spare time and there's nothing else to do. It's like up on the mountain. So I was just playing on my phone and then reading news, and I read a lot of news about, all over the world, there's people suffering from hunger. There's people suffering from disease. There's people with depression and committed suicide. I don't know how I feel about it, but I'm just like reading news every day until one day I woke up, and then I was just sitting on the bed, and suddenly I was starting to think, okay, what matters to me and what I really want for myself, and eventually, ultimately, what I can bring to this world. I know those are some questions. When you're like busy in doing stuff, you never really sit down to think about that, but I don't know why that day when I woke up, I just started thinking about that. And then I guess at that moment, I just felt like marketing wasn't something I really wanted to pursue in my future. It has always been in my mind because I did some internship with pharmaceutical company. And it's always been in my mind that, the use of medication should not be based on which company has the best sales representative. It should based on which pharmaceutical works the best for a specific patient. And in that case, I just feel like I don't want it to, work hard to achieve a specific, sales goals. I would rather, work hard to contribute to developing a new drug and investigating disease mechanisms. So then I just told my mom that I wanted to do master. No one expected I would, go for master studies. And yeah, so then after that summer break, it's like 6 months before I need to, transition to master. So I spent every single day in the library for like 4 months, from like 9 a.m. to 11 p.m. in the library the whole day. And then get into the entrance exam. And then finally, met my supervisor for my master and then did that. And then luckily, I also met my supervisor for my graduate study, Dr. Hill, when I was actually doing my master in Sichuan. We have really good relationship. And so I was discussing my science. And then he really liked that I'm enthusiastic about that. When I told him my story, he actually realized it. Like sometimes I get worried that people think that you don't have a solid science background and then people might not want to take you as a PhD student. But that's not the case. Like he was telling me, actually, some people really like that because that means that you are determined. You know exactly what you wanted to do. You're not just like flowing that, maybe you do a PhD. Like you have experienced that and now you know, okay, you do want to do science. Like that's good. So yeah, so eventually I applied for the PhD program. So in terms of your question, why you feel like I am like, doesn't feel like I'm new. I think it maybe helps that during my master, the last year of my master, I actually do an exchange program with Mizzou. So I went to Mizzou for 6 months as a visiting scholar before I actually started my PhD. That also, like during that time, I feel like I really enjoy doing science. So finally, I make the decision to do my PhD. So I would say when I first went there, I do feel a little nervous. The first time I joined the journal club, I can't exactly remember when I met you in the journal club. Was it during my PhD or when I was doing my visiting?
What semester were you there for visiting scholars?
Yeah, so it was 2018. 2018 August. That's the first time I came to the U.S. as a visiting scholar.
Okay, I started in August of 2019.
Okay, yeah, so that makes sense because that's actually the second time I was in the U.S. Yeah.
Okay, it's starting to come together because I do remember the department talking about, the professors were talking about you coming in and we have a student from visiting scholars. So we all kind of knew someone named Li Ping was coming and that she was so smart. So it's starting to come together. So continue on.
Yes, I was part of that. And then Dr. Martinez was super nice. And Thaisa, a postdoc at Dr. Martinez's lab, super nice. I think that helps me a lot because you have people that are willing to help you, and then she's also international. And then she would tell me that if you're struggling with English, there's like English class hosted in some church and you can go there. And then there's journal club. It really helps you to, make some friends and discussing science with them. So even though I'm not a student, I was invited to the journal club. Yeah. And the first couple of times I was in the journal club, I was super nervous. Yeah, I'm like, I'm going to talk about these figures like in front of everyone. Yeah. So even though like some people think that, oh, you're smart. No, like the first couple of times. And I never did that before when I was in China. So I didn't know, oh, this is called journal club. And then we're just going to talk about it. Yeah. So eventually I just need to find ways how I can improve myself. So the way that I did it is I spend a lot of time on one paper at the beginning. Now I don't need to, I get used to that thing. But I spend a lot of time reading paper and then each figure, I would write down exactly how I think about them. I can't just, because I'll get nervous when, when it comes to me, okay, Liping, figure 3, I'll get nervous. I'll forget about everything. So I actually write down every single word about this figure that I think this is what it's telling us. I actually write it down. And so then I will think about it in my head, exact word that I'm going to say about this. So then I will feel like more comfortable of going through the figures. And I prepare for every figures at the beginning. It's kind of fun to look back. And then because compared to my graduate study, which I still do journal club, I feel so much like, relaxed when I look at a paper. I can quickly go through them and I know what kind of experiment was done to get these figures. And then it just become more and more familiar with them. But at the beginning, it's definitely hard.
Yeah. So just to give context, journal club, I'm laughing because that was just such an interesting class. So we met once a week and we were assigned papers. So these are extremely long papers. I don't even know, several pages long.
Mm-hmm.
And we were assigned those papers to read every week. And then we'd come to class and everyone would take turns explaining the results of the paper. But the results were put into forms of figures. So either graphs or images or things like that we all had to kind of explain. And there were several of those figures. And it's not like the professor wasn't going around saying, okay, your turn. You had to volunteer. So
Mm-hmm.
It was kind of like, before time, the figures that were a little bit easier, quote unquote, to explain and the ones that are a little bit more difficult. So we're all trying to avoid the difficult figures. So, I mean, it was a lot of fun. I think that really was helpful in learning how to read papers because I don't know about you, but I don't think I ever read every single, like from beginning to end, but you kind of learn how to still read it and get the relevant information and then kind of learn the work that is put in to get the results and to understand the specific experiment that is being talked about or how it was designed and things like that. So yeah, that was a lot of fun.
Yeah, it definitely is. Yes. I learned a lot from the journal club. Yeah.
Yeah. So, okay. So since you were part of visiting scholars, you felt like it was easier to kind of assimilate into the U.S. culture because you already had experience visiting from China before you actually moved here permanently. So when you first came to the U.S. before you started your program, were there any differences that you noticed within culture or anything that was kind of a shock? Can you talk about how that was for you?
Yeah, there's a lot differences as in terms of culture for sure. I would say the first impression was there's no people. Because in China, no matter where you go, there's always people around, Suddenly, Columbia, Missouri, so at the beginning, when I came for visiting, I lived inside the campus because my supervisor and they think that it's my supervisor back in China because he is the one that sponsored for this visiting program. He think it would be safer for me, in the US, especially the first time. So I live inside the campus. And it's 30 minutes walk to Dalton Cardiovascular Research Center where I work at. During the whole walk, I really met one or two people for 30 minutes. That is just not possible in China. Yeah. And so that's one thing. And then, so the first couple of days when I was walking, and then I passed by a stadium, I think. And then there's people there, one of those two people. And then they would say, how are you doing? And I start thinking, do I know this person? Yeah. So that is the strange thing that I started to learn. People would talk to people that they don't know. And then in China, you just don't do that. I guess maybe because you met so many people all the time, you're not going to say, hey, how are you doing? How are you doing? How are you doing? Right. But in Columbia, Missouri, if in a road that you don't really see people, yeah, no matter who they see, they're going to say, how are you doing? How's your morning? And that is just something that I wasn't expecting. That's one thing. The other thing that I still kind of talk to my friends is people hold the door for each other. And I didn't know that. Like, no one does that. Like, I guess in a fancy hotel or something, like in China, people might do that. But here, like all the students, when I went to like student centers, like I'm still like far away, and then people are still holding door for me, and I'm like starting to run. And my boyfriend always say that you don't need to run. If they hold it, that means they can wait. I'm like, but they're holding the door for me. I have to rush. Yeah, like that is also something I found it really interesting, and then people are still doing it. But I guess it also depends on where you're at in the US. Now I started to realize, since I live in different places now, I definitely think like Midwest, people are generally more, slower, and then, would be a little nicer to strangers. And in Boston, people are more like, rushed to do something. So not as many people hold doors for me now. But that's one thing that I found very interesting. And then the other thing I guess I struggle the most is public transportation. So like really in Columbia, Missouri, if you don't have a car, you can't go anywhere. Like you can't even walk for most places. Like because I live inside the campus, so I can walk to my lab. But if I live outside of the campus, there's no way for me to get there if I don't have a car. And if you want to go grocery shopping, if you don't have a car, you can't do it. So some churches are really good. Like they would have people volunteer to drive international students, like a visiting scholar, to like shop at Walmart like once a week. But yeah, that is something that I just wouldn't expect. In China, you can go anywhere. Like there is subways, bus, they can take you anywhere. And then most places are very walkable also. So that's the part that I struggle the most, I think.
Yeah, I really loved hearing all of those. I don't think we've talked about that before, but I've never really thought of that. Obviously, China is extremely, extremely populated.
Mm-hmm.
So I didn't really think about how that could be a huge difference to you when you're saying like, oh, I didn't really see anyone. To me, I'm like, yeah, there's people. But to you, you're like,
Yeah.
no, there's no one. There's no one out here. So that's really interesting. And then you also brought up how it's not very walkable in certain places in the US, some more than others, but definitely not in Columbia, Missouri. I definitely agree with that. And then how churches would kind of step in and help out with transporting people. So I think that was a really cool point to bring up, because for me, as someone who's really involved in church and knowing that outreach to people is important, I think it can be easy to just get used to like, oh yeah, we're helping people, whatever, but not realizing that the impact it can have on someone who is coming into a new place for the first time, and actually recognizing it's just a reminder that it does make a difference when churches are stepping out to help people, especially to people who are maybe unfamiliar with the culture, with the place. And you never really know someone's background, that what you're doing is really actually valuable to them in that sense. So I thought that was cool that you brought that up.
Yeah, so that's interesting because that's actually how I met my boyfriend here. It's through church, yes, because he was like he volunteered to be my driver, and then we met, and then we started dating. Yeah, so that's kind of So even though I'm not religious, but I definitely think that churches in Colombia, they're doing a lot of good. Like for visiting scholar, they have like English program, and then when I came to Mizzou, really besides my supervisor, I don't know anyone. Like I don't have friends, I don't have families here. And that is kind of hard. Like you always have friends around, and if you want to do something, I always grab my friends to do it together, and you don't have anyone at that moment. So like church event at least kind of push you to get to interact with other people, and then they all kind of share the same experience because most of them are actually visiting scholar, I think, like for international church. And we get to learn about the culture, and then when there is like a US holiday, they would have like celebrating dinner. You got free food, and then you also like get to interact with people and know some friends. So you feel more like belonged. So I really like that part actually.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And you've shared that story with me of how you met your boyfriend. I'm sure there are churches in China, or am I wrong? Did you grow up in an area? Well, I guess what I'm asking specifically, where you grew up, did you grow up in an area where there was a lot of churches or not a lot of churches?
So I would not say there's a lot, like compared to the US for sure, but there is churches. And so that's funny because I never think about like how people here would think about churches back in China until last year. We visited China. Me and my boyfriend, we both went to China, and then so we were walking on like downtown in Guangzhou, and then with my brother-in-law, and then my brother-in-law saw a church on our way to somewhere, and then he said, "Oh, Jeffrey, this is a church." And I just thought, oh, okay. And then Jeffrey went in and said a prayer. And then he posted a really long post on Facebook. And then when I went through it, I'm like, that's interesting. And then I saw like people's comment. They really think that there's no church at all in China. And then they thought that church has to be like secret, like they cannot be, discovered. I'm like, I didn't know that people think about that. No, those churches are like at downtown, like a very busy street, and there's church there. And my sister-in-law actually is religious. So yeah, so there's people religious, there's people go to church. I just won't say it's as common as in the US.
Yeah, that makes sense. And this is just me out of curiosity, just asking you this question, Liping. So with churches in China, and when you're saying that you talked about your sister being religious and going to church. So what do you mean by that? Because here in the US, when I think of church, or even Nigeria, because I'm familiar with that culture, I'm thinking of Christians worshiping in a church that worship Jesus. But I know there's different religions that have different places of worship, but I don't think that they would call those places churches. So I guess my question is, what would a church be considered in China now that you're familiar with both cultures?
Yeah. It's mostly Christians. Yeah, I don't know if there's other ones, but like as far as I'm concerned, is Christian. Like other religions, like Buddhism, like those you won't call it like churches, right? Those are like temples, etc. Yeah. So when I meant churches, it's mostly Christian.
Okay. All right. Yeah, that makes sense. That's what I thought. Mm-hmm. Okay. Super cool. And then another thing I wanted to ask is, so you kind of shared some of your first thoughts when arriving to the US, and I appreciate that. And then kind of how you're adapting now. So do you feel like you're understanding a lot more of US culture now than before? And how has that been? Because you've been here several years at this point.
Oh, yeah. Since 2018, so like 6 years. I think I'm adapting well. So as I mentioned, when I first came, really don't have friends and family. That makes it really hard. And especially my boyfriend's American. So that helps a lot because I have to get to know his culture. And then, with his family. So I get to experience a lot of different things that I feel that I'm lucky also, like in at this extent, because some international students, if they don't really have like American friends, sometimes it's hard for them to try new things because you get nervous about something new, like maybe not, because I don't want to do something that people feel like I'm not respecting their culture. But since I have people leading me there, so that helps a lot. And over the years, definitely I am starting to learn more about the culture. I guess I forgot to mention about the other thing that I feel very different. And then I listened to Vasha's talk, and I found that we have so much differences in that respect to food. So she was saying that there's so many options and then so many variety. When I listen to them, I'm like, that's interesting, because I complain the most about its food. Yeah, all the time. Like even now, 6 years in, 8 years in, I'm still like, no, I wanted to go back to China because of the food. Like I feel like there's so much limitation. Like there's not as much varieties. And it's always this, especially in Colombia. Now in Boston, it's so much better because you have so much more people. So now I do see people every day. there's a lot of people here in Boston, so they are a little bit more, similar to China, and then like city stuff. And then there's like many international cuisine, and they actually like taste authentic. So the part about like in Colombia, there is still Chinese restaurant, but we normally don't go there because they are American Chinese.
How different is the Chinese food in America versus Chinese food in China? The people want to know.
Yeah. I think the biggest thing is they always make food more sweet here. Like for Chinese food, there's always gravy on it. I'm like, what? Like, I don't even know what gravy is before I came here. Yeah, there's always like a sauce you pour over it, and then like fried chicken. You just make fried chicken with different sauce, and you call it like orange chicken, and then you call it cashew chicken, and you call it, like that is interesting. But some Chinese restaurant, they have secret menu. So you went in there, if you don't ask for anything, it's like American Chinese. But if you ask for, I want the Chinese menu, they will give you a secret Chinese menu. So those food will actually be a little bit more authentic because they know that you're willing to try those. And then it will be in most, I've started to figure most Chinese restaurants in like Midwest, they are more like Sichuan or Hunan cuisine. Like in China, there's many different provinces, and then they all have like different type of food. Not every food are like spicy, but seems like the spicy food are more popular in Midwest. Like most restaurants are like spicy food, or like fried food, etc. Like my hometown, it's more about like the ingredient, like the freshness of like seafood, or you don't really add a lot of seasoning to it. But I guess in Midwest, you don't have those resources, so it's more popular to have like Hunan cuisine, things like that. The other thing that I found it most interesting about Chinese restaurant in the US is fortune cookie. So after you had a meal, they give you a fortune cookie. I'm like, what is this? They say, what? You don't know about this? You're Chinese. I'm like, yeah, no one do that in China. Like, what? After a meal, you get a fortune cookie? No. But nowadays, people do like candies. That is actually more common. Like they will give you like a mint candy because after you have like very strong flavor food, you don't want to like smell like that. So when you check out, like they will have like a little jar with a bunch of candy, and you can just grab some if you want. Like that is very common. But fortune cookie, never heard about it at all.
Where did that come from then?
Don't know. I didn't look it up actually, so I don't know. I guess, the first few people that when they started to, immigrate to the US, they started doing that maybe.
Wow. I love conversations like this because it just kind of helps you see the reality. Because sometimes you're just so used to, like in American culture or just in your culture in general, so used to the way that things are done or the way that things are portrayed, especially like it's portrayed in this way. So you think that's reality. I know people from other countries because I've heard like friends I have from other countries talk about how US is portrayed in the movies or on TikTok or on Instagram. But when they come here, it's different. So it's just really cool to, like you said, have friends in different cultures, have American friends. And then obviously I have friends, especially when I was in grad school, from different countries, and just learning, wow, like the reality of what's actually happening in the world versus what we think is happening. So that's really amazing.
Yeah. So that's really interesting. So I feel when I came to US, I feel more responsible for my culture somehow. Like you got this pressure on yourself because I feel like, now I don't feel as much, but when I first came, I just feel like everything I did, people are going to think, oh, Chinese just do that. Sometimes it just me personally like to do this. Not all the Chinese do that. But then I feel, responsible for that. Like I'm carrying my whole country on me.
Yeah.
Like, yeah, that's kind of interesting. And also like here in Chinatown, I just felt like that's what people think China would look like. And it really isn't. Because Chinatown are all like really old, and then people moving here like 20, 30 years. Those are the people that are doing business here. And that is like old China, and new China is not like this. So sometimes it's interesting to look at it. Like when I was talking to some American friends, they were saying that, oh, they went to Chinatown, and then the people would take them to a secret store, and then like secret door, and then they started selling them like some purses that is like, I'm like, huh? That's interesting. Like, like that doesn't happen in China. Yeah, they would think it's kind of like that. And then they were thinking, oh, people are climbing up on the train, like because it's so crowded. And then I think that's in the movie. Yeah, it's kind of interesting sometimes when I was talking about that.
Yeah, that is. So, just the last couple questions before we round up. So you are now studying science within the US. Would you say there's a lot of differences between when you did your master's in China and then getting your doctorate here and now doing postdoc between science, or was it a pretty easy transition?
I would not say like overall there is big differences between like the US and China. I think the greater differences are from lab to lab, like compared to like country to country. The lab that I'm in China and in the US for my graduate study, like they're very similar because the PI's mentoring style are very similar. So that is like a really easy transition to me. I think it like now as I transition to postdoctoral actually is a little more difficult because the mentoring style are very different. So I think that will make the differences is like how the PI mentor manage the lab, or is it a big lab versus a small lab, because that it would be like super different. And also labs that are some labs are more, how do you say that, like a focus on like basic science, you pick some mechanism and then you're just really starting that mechanism. But some labs really like overall big idea that you can't just focus on a specific mechanism. You need to think about a very novel idea. Then you need to explore many different things. So I think that's the biggest differences. If I have to pick something that I think would be different is, at least from, the people that I know, I feel like Chinese scientists are more motivated. They work really, really hard. But in the negative perspective, they might not have as much work-life balance. This is also a word that I feel like I am more used to when I moved to the US. People talk about it more often versus back in China. It's not that people make you to work. You just kind of feel like I need to work harder and harder and harder. You're just never like good enough. You just feel like you need to achieve like a better role. You kind of always push yourself like that. But here, like actually came to Boston, there is some lab like this too. So I really think it's like from lab to lab.
Okay, that is interesting. And when I asked Vivian that question, she kind of started talking about work-life balance as well.
Oh, yeah.
Well, she was saying within the US, it was more like people were working all the time. When it comes to science, especially like you're in the lab 24/7, you can go in the lab Saturday night, Sunday morning if you have experiments. But when she was schooling within the UK, there was break, there was holidays, there's vacation. Everyone kind of stops during a certain time of the day, like 4 o'clock. Everyone's kind of done and relaxing. But here, people are working more. And then you're saying in China, they're even more motivated. So it's like, whoa.
I know, yeah. So I listened to Vivian's episode. I also felt, oh, okay, that's also something that I feel different. Yeah, it is really fun to like, seeing that people experience the same thing but have a very different feeling. Because during my graduate study, I feel like I have life. Yeah, I would take 1 week off during summertime. I'll go travel, and then wintertime I'll take another week off. I'll go travel, and it just, maybe we're used to like work or so now I came here. Oh, I get some time to travel. I already feel like, oh, I got life. But yeah, we do have overall idea that we feel like the European side are more laid back and relaxed, and then the US, and then China. Yeah, but here actually at Harvard, it really depends on the lab. Some lab, there's like postdoc, they almost live in the lab. Yeah, so there are people like that. Personally, I am more like if I'm working on a project, if there is certain days that my experiment have to be done like within this whole day, because when you collect the tissue, you have to do all the measurement. I don't mind working until midnight. I do work some days until midnight, but I would not want that to be like I am selecting like every day I wanted to work like this. I do want, because I wanted to this be my like career in the future. I'm not gonna just do that. I love science, but I do need a life without it also. Yeah, because I got families, got friends, they're not in science, like, so we need to spend time together. So yeah, but overall, I think during my PhD, I don't feel really stressed, I think. So that's a little different. And I do feel like I have a good work-life balance. I'm actually hosting a seminar on this topic in November for postdoc.
Yeah, and it just depends on the environment that you're coming from. Because Vivian came from the UK and then she's coming to the US. So it's like, whoa, why are we not taking breaks? Why do we not have more holidays? And then you're coming from China to here. So you're like, oh, wow, I have so much time to do everything I want to do. So very interesting. Would you move back to China?
Yes. Yes, the ultimate goal is to move back to China. I wanted to have my own lab in China. This actually, before I first came here, I already have this mind, and then talk to my parents. I won't say they forced me, because I also wanted to go back to China, but they really worried. They make me promise that I will go back. Yeah, so it's kind of like an agreement. And then, I really enjoy having families around, even though I do have friends here now. But, I have friends that I know them since my junior high, and they're all in China. And, those are the times that you have your best friend, and and the food. So those are some major reasons that I do want to go back. And I do love having people around. Yes, overall, I think I like the US part about, relaxing in the Midwest. There's nobody, you can just chill. But I also like having things very convenient to me. And then I can just, walk down the street and there's a restaurant there. And then there are shops around. And so I am going back to China.
When do you kind of see yourself moving back to China? Would you say permanently or just kind of playing it by ear?
This is a good question. So I won't say the word permanently, especially, Jeffrey, like he's from the US. So if I say that, it's going to scare his family a lot. So I think right now our plan is we'll both move back to China once I finish my postdoc, and then, get a faculty position in the US. But his family and I'm also thinking about if there is like, I think it's getting harder now. Like back then, there is jobs that you can do, like, you can have both position, I think, in the US and in China, and you can spend half of your time in US and half of your time in China. I didn't know if I say it right. Yeah, like a job like that. Or I don't know, like after we retire, or maybe like 10 years in, do we wanted to move back to the US? I would not, right now, I would not say I never wanted to move back to the US. Yeah, so I would not say permanently, but the current goal is to move back.
Yeah, and you kind of talked about that a couple of days ago when we were on WhatsApp. You were sharing that you applied to Harvard, Stanford, and Yale because of that goal of wanting to move back. When you told me that, I was like, okay.
Yeah. So
awesome.
During that month, I'm like, every day I was thinking, should I go to Harvard? Should I go to Stanford? I couldn't fall asleep because of that. And my friend was like, come on, it's Harvard and Stanford and you're struggling about this. Like, I wish I had that kind of problem.
Either way, you'll be fine.
That's what they were saying. I'm like, but I need to look at their grant, and I need to look at how many papers they publish, and I need to look at their mentoring style, and then I need to, dig deep into their research and see if this is something that I'm interested in. I know that since I wanted to move back to China and then get a faculty job, so I need to prepare myself for that route. And then maybe some people will not agree, but if you wanted to get a really good position, you really need like really good papers. So when I say good papers is you need to publish in like really high impact factors journal. And that is the thing most people, most places, most institution, university cares the most, because that's some sort of evidence that show them that you can do really good research. So I know that is what they're looking for. So I need to get that. Some university like in Midwest, some people don't care about like publishing in Nature Science. They feel as long as we're doing good research, we're finding answers. It can be published in impact factor of 4. It doesn't matter. It doesn't need to go in Nature. And in fact, some professors, they were saying they are like avoiding publishing in high impact factor because to publish on such journal, you need like a couple years to build up like data. And that is actually slowing down science because you already figure out, oh, this doesn't work, this work, but you are like withholding the data because you wanted to save them for a bigger paper. So then people would not know, and then people will keep repeating doing this. So it kind of like wasted the resources. Like some people think it this way. So then they will avoid like saving data for a bigger paper. They will just, okay, we find this and we're going to publish it, even though it's not high impact factor. But I know if I wanted to move back there, like they do care the most about high impact factors, and they do care about what university you are in when you are in the US. That's why I'm specifically only looking for like world known university, like top ones like Harvard, Yale, Stanford. Like when you write down in your resume, people are like, oh wow, so you probably get some really good training. I know it's not always the truth, but I know it's gonna help me, and they are good universities. So, and there is professor doing really great research here. So then I tell myself, okay, I'm going to do this. But if I'm not moving to China, if I wanted to do science in the US, I don't think I would go to Harvard or Yale or Stanford. I'll probably stay in the Midwest because you got more opportunity to find a faculty position. So here at Harvard, if you do postdoc, it's really hard. Like there's so many people competing to stay as an assistant professor here. But like in Missouri, they're opening up like new research building. There's more opening. So you got a higher chance to actually get to the next step. So if I'm not moving to China, I probably would stay there. But since I am, so yeah, so those are the choices when I was looking for postdoc. I'm like thinking ahead what I need to prepare myself for. Yeah.
Yeah, I like that a lot. And you kind of talked about that at the beginning when you shared how you just woke up in the morning and you started thinking,
Yeah.
What do I want to do with my life? What is my purpose on earth? Kind of thing.
Yeah.
And I think to some extent, we all kind of have that question a little bit. And I like that you were saying that you are taking steps to get there and kind of thinking ahead of, okay, if this is where I want to be, how do I need to get there? And then you are just a very motivated person to put those things in place to make sure that you get to where you want to be. Obviously, no one can predict the future. We don't know how things will work, but we can plan what we want to do each day and then just hope for the best. So yeah, that's really cool. And just based on your experiences, so you've had a lot of different experiences. I loved hearing about just your upbringing in China and then coming here, and then now you're at Harvard, and then just learning more about the US culture and things like that. So overall, what would you say that the big picture is? And within the last 6 or 7 years of your life, looking back, what would you say is one big lesson that you can say, okay, this is the big picture that I want to take with me?
Yeah. So I definitely consider myself as a very motivated person. But I feel like I'm very open to changes also. Like, okay, this is the path that I see. Like right now, I envision my future like this. But when things happened and I feel like this is not something I want anymore, I think I'm brave enough to like break it and then make a different move. So the big picture is, I think everyone matters. I matters. And what doesn't matter is where you're from, what your background is. Even I'm a first gen, I can still go to Harvard to do my postdoc, and it's never too late to make a change if we figure that that is not something we want for ourselves. And the most important part, I think, and I have to say this in Cantonese because we say it a lot, is 做人最緊要係要開心啦。Did you get that? So the meaning is, after all, the most important thing is to be happy. And I always keep that in mind. I have a goal, I have my career goal, I need to spend time with families, but overall, you have to be happy about where you're at. And if you're not happy about it, then you need to make a move, do something different. And it's always fine to, it's never too late to make a change. Yeah, I always have that in my mind. I think that is my big picture.
I love that. That is so true. And the world, and this is something I was kind of sharing with Varsha, just how there's so many opportunities in the world and there's so many things going on. There's so many things that we can do if we want, we can try new things, we can experience new things, we can meet new people. Those are all part of experiencing new things, and taking those opportunities are really important, because it's kind of like you learn more about yourself. You're like, oh, I didn't realize that I could do this, if I just tried. So
exactly. Yeah. I would never imagine I would be here when I was doing my undergrad. I failed my classes and really didn't, some of my old friends, they were like, oh, you should write a book about your experience. I'm like, yeah, maybe. But yeah, never doubt yourself. Like, if you feel there's so much opportunities around, like if you don't try, you never know what you can actually get.
Yeah, and it's not easy, but it can be worth it.
It can be, yes.
Thank you, Liping, for sharing, and it was just been really cool catching up this past week. For some reason, I feel like just with people in the program that we are in, I know that we're not keeping in touch all the time, like texting or calling all the time, but just picking up the phone and FaceTiming you, it seems like we have been like keeping in touch the whole time. You know what I mean? Like it's very easy to just catch up and see how you're doing. And same with Varsha and Vivian. It would be really fun to have all of us together and just kind of share where we're at and what we're doing and just to catch up. So I really appreciate you sharing. And thank you everyone for listening. I hope this was inspiring to you and that you learned something new about Chinese culture or about anything. And hopefully we're very motivated